So, we talked about the lab leak. We talked about the evictions crisis. It's been kind of a heavy time. I'm gonna keep that going. I'm gonna talk about some uncomfortable words for us honkies. There's a Jubilee video I watched, and if you guys want, we could watch it later. But I don't think it's really that interesting. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jubilee videos or not. This one's like a year old, and I just saw Dylan Burns reacting to it. That's where my motivation for this came from. It was called something like white people talking about race relations or something, like just super fucking cringy. And Jubilee, I feel like they're some kind of a like right wing Christian kind of group that tries to host these neutral chats about important topics. So they're usually really just chock full of cringe and loaded for bear. So hopefully we'll get that. But we may watch that. But I feel like a lot of honkies like myself don't understand some stuff, and I want to share some stuff. Apparently, colonizer chaps some honky asses. Honestly, like I get it. I hate being called a colonizer or a settler, because my lineage did not. They certainly live here, but I didn't come here as part of the colonial effort. But I get it. I totally get it. It's words that bug me because I feel like I think the real reason they bug me is that I feel like I'm being lumped into a category, which never happens to people who aren't white. It only ever happens to white people. Anyway, so some words. First off, the concept of a white race. Race is a fucked up word. Race is in purely like anthropological sense, we have one race. We have the human race. And I'm not being like some smug like there's only one race, the human race. I mean, if I understand cladistics correctly, a race, the separating point between two races means that they're no longer able to produce viable offspring. We can do that, so these are just differences. They're not a whole race thing. But there's the social construct of race. And the social construct of race has some realities associated with it. So, there are people, for example, who are light skinned like me. And we all have some, you can say, well, Jim is white. And all of the people who have similar kinds of things are, well, we'll call them white. It's a social construct and nothing more. Black is also a social construct. Indigenous is a social construct. There is, in the case of indigenous in particular, I think there's a lot more, because it's essentially a group that came across the Bering Strait or whatever our origin was, and then were geographically isolated, and sort of all of indigenous peoples came from those initial people from that land bridge. So there is something to be said about that being a smaller, or a more identifiable, unique, distinct race. But obviously, within indigenous communities, the Sioux and the Cree are very different, and both physically different and culturally different, and all these things. People get upset when people say the black, how can white not be a race when black is a race? Really, what we're saying when we're talking about black people is we're talking about A, yes, the physical descriptions, but B, the certain things that are sort of common experiences that black people have encountered within our society, or indigenous people, or Asian people, whatever group you want. There's certain things that they will have experienced that are unique to their race, for want of another term. White isn't a race because white is essentially other. Because we're the ones that came up with these things, we're the ones that basically went, okay, well, white is this, and then everyone else fits. And those rules, because they're socially constructed, they change. So Irish people were not considered white. Jews were not considered white. Italians were not considered white. Now they may or may not be, depending on how swarthy they are. Like, who fucking cares? This is all stupid. But white race doesn't have common experiences, because essentially the white race is just people with white skin who come from all over the world and have had different experiences, and there's really no commonality. The only thing that we really have in common is, generally speaking, we're the, whether accidentally or intentionally, we are the oppressive people, the colonizers, as it were. When people talk about like black culture, they're talking about some very specific things that are niche to black people. That doesn't mean that white people can't listen to Maya Angelou. It doesn't mean that white people can't make rap music. But black culture is a very clearly seeable thing. White culture is everything else. That's what I mean when I say other, right? Basically, everything that's not uniquely, like, this is a thing that's indigenous culture. This is a thing that's black culture. This is a thing that's Asian culture. Everything else is like, oh yeah, that's just honky. Now, there's a word called reverse racism. That's a word that makes a lot of people very angry. And essentially, when people say reverse racism, they're talking about racism against the more powerful, like in our society, it would be against white people. And there are arguments about, is reverse racism okay? Is it just racism? I personally, my take on it is that the term reverse racism is simply a way of talking about racism that is a specific kind of racism. In the same way that you would say chocolate milk versus almond milk. It is a type of racism. It is racist and wrong to hate white people, just like it's racist and wrong to hate everybody. But a lot of people do it, and we've kind of earned some of that shit, and we have to own that. So, sorry, folks. I don't think reverse racism, like racism has a bunch of different sort of origin stories, for want of a better term. Some people equate power as part of racism, and there's certainly, that is a type of racism, is the power base. So I am a white person and I have power, and I may not even be intentionally being racist when when racism is happening in my name. That's a valid thing. I personally take racism as racism is looking at a group based on their race and prejudging and acting violently upon those prejudgments. So in that regard, when you don't have power as part of the equation, then white people can be the victims of racism. If your definition of racism is informed by the idea of power, well, then white people have the power. Even those of us that don't still have the power. Which brings us to privilege. Privilege is a hard sell for a lot of white people, because a lot of us aren't rich. A lot of us aren't powerful. A lot of us didn't have lives of luxury. So it's hard for us to fathom that we are privileged. Like if you're poor, and I've been poor, and if you're struggling to survive, and someone goes, yeah, that's your white privilege. Like, fuck you, dude. I am not privileged. I'm on the fucking bottom. I had a friend who is someone I care very deeply about, who we were having this conversation once, and she was quite upset and said, like, I don't understand how anyone could think that I'm privileged. I am, like, a woman. I am not college educated. I am, blah, 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 all these things. How am I privileged? To which the answer is, any situation you find yourself in, the fact that you are white makes it a little bit less dangerous for you. That's probably like a fairly reductive way of looking at it, but that's how we were talking about it. And I said, okay, so if you're driving a car, you're driving a Mercedes-Benz, gorgeous car, a cop sees you. He is not instinctively, no matter how rich or poor you are, he's not going to think, I should pull them over just to be sure, right? Whereas people who are indigenous or black or whatever, those things in the back of the cop's head would be like, hey, I don't remember giving permission. I don't remember, hearing about an indigenous person who's rich and could be driving a woman driving around a Mercedes. It must be stolen. And that's a perception thing that is, a failing on the part of the officer involved, obviously. But it's also, that's white privilege. If you walk into a room that is full of black people or indigenous people or whatever, the chances are you will not experience anywhere near the difficulty that someone, if those tables were turned. And that's white privilege. Having the ability for me to apply for a student loan, even though I was not working, I was poor, I didn't come from a wealthy family, I had no problem getting a student loan. A lot of indigenous people, a lot of black people don't have that same experience. These are privileges that I didn't even realize I had. Bender's saying, I tried to explain that to my brother-in-law, how just walking into Walmart is a different experience for both of us, and he still couldn't grasp it. And, I get it, because when I first got told about white privilege, I didn't get it. I was very much like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I grew up the poorest kid in a rich area. I was funny looking. I was skinny and weak. Like a million things. As an adult, I'm an old punk rocker. Cops love harassing me. I live in this shitty place. Like, it's hard to think about my life as being privileged. And then I realized that if all of the other things were true and I had a different color skin, some of those doors that have opened for me would not have opened for me. There would be problems that I encountered specifically because I wasn't a white person. And privilege doesn't mean, this is the common misunderstanding, is that the richest black person is not, it obviously is better off than the poorest white person. It's not a scale like that. It's a scale like, if you take two people of similar economic and class structure, one of them will have a harder time, and it ain't the white person in our society. And then pride. A lot of fucking people get real strange about the word pride. To me, I hear white pride, I only think one thing. I think white supremacist, Nazi piece of shit, now I'm going to have to punch a guy. For good reason. That's what most of the pride folk are. Black pride is not the same monster. Black pride is people who are refusing to be ashamed for being part of the black race or the black culture, whatever, however you want to break it down. These people with these shared experiences are saying, you know what? We're not putting up with shit. We're proud of who we are. So you could have a black person from, historically from the Caribbean, and a black person historically from Africa, and they would have shared experience based on their blackness, that they can be proud of who they are as black people. That's okay. White pride is a different monster. White pride is, again, the other thing falls into this. So really, you can argue that white people have done all the greatest things. We invented capitalism. No, we didn't. We were, the English Empire. Okay, well, that's not really something to be proud about. We did, like, you can list all of our accomplishments and go, yay, look at white people. And fine. Like, don't be ashamed of being okay with the fact that you're a honky. But pride in the fact that you're a honky, I never understood pride in general over these kinds of things, like Scottish people. I had a buddy who's Scottish, and like, that mattered to him. That mattered to him a great deal. And I never understood that, because I could give two shits. I'm like a Western European shit mix of probably the poorest honkies that ever there were historically. Who cares? It doesn't matter to me. But I get why it matters to people who have been oppressed and who are not the majority and who need to stand together and care about each other, to have some pride in their experiences and, be able to stand with pride. That makes sense. I'm good with that. To me, it's understandable for black pride, Asian pride, Irish pride, these kinds of things. Fine, be proud of it. Being proud that you happen to be born into the amorphous blob that is honky, wow, congratulations. That must have been really an impressive feat for you. His whole mindset was that he was supposed to apologize for being white, which of course was not my point in the whole thing. Fragility. Fragility is another tough one. Oh yeah, saying my pride. We're going to have an issue saying I'm a proud Russian. I'm going to be curious and ask questions. You say black pride. I'm going to empathize in the struggle that came to be able to say that. Totally. White pride is very clear. It means something, and pretending it doesn't change a goddamn thing. So fragility, and I still suffer from fragility as a honky. Right, fragility is where we encounter an experience and feel picked on for our whiteness. Some people are really easy to get upset about this. Like if you refer to somebody as a Mayo people, they'll be like, "Fuck you, man, that's racist." In my case, it's usually more like, you know, a good example is, as Bender said, some white people don't like being called a colonizer or, a settler. Every time I hear that, I'm like, I'm on your side, guys. But I know that's my fragility, and I know that's like, no one is actively saying, you there, you, Jim, you are terrible people, and we hate you, and you came personally to the country and, you know, forced all the indigenous people into reservations. I know that. And logically, I totally get why the term is used. But every time I see it, I'm like, but hey, but not me. Because that's my fragility. And that's something I'm working on. It's actually deeply frustrating because, like, being a honky is so fucking easy. And then you have like a moment where you encounter something that is slightly uncomfortable, and you're like, but no, my life has been magic. You can't say that I'm a colonizer. I'm starting to like alabaster. Yeah, that is another one that I've been called an alabaster, and it's like I get it, but I do have this part of me that's like, why are you lumping all white people into? But you know what? It's not like my people haven't done that to other people, so I just have to suck that up. That's life. And there's part of me that does get a kick out of alabaster as an insult. Yeah, fragility it's tricky because it's another one of those things we just don't see ourselves having until we actively go, oh, there that is. Another one that's commonly in the news right now is critical race theory, CRT. Critical race theory is actually really cool. It is the application or the view of history with race in the undertone. So looking at the impact of racial politics on the foundations of America, of Canada, etc. I think that's important, and I think it's important that we don't lose track of that, because that's what we historically have done. People are all upset about, that statue of Sir John A. Macdonald got knocked over, and that's not okay. Why are you trying to hide the history? Who's fucking hiding history, homeboy? Is it the guy who knocked the statue down out of anger? Or is it the guy who's like, and here's my book report on Sir John A. Macdonald. Never did nothing wrong to nobody. Great man, great leader. Nothing more to say. One of us is a fucking liar, and it's you. Critical race theory it's appearing in schools and things, in the sense that, as human beings, we're trying to, do the best we can to understand the world around us and to communicate that to children. I know. Sickening, trying to make children aware of the world around them. Trying to reach children and approach that, sort of some of those ingrained bigotries and say, hey, before you, think about that. Let's talk a little bit about, where this country came from. Because it's one story to say, yeah, the settlers came and they had a big turkey dinner and then everything was good. And the native people were like, hey, I'm just going to go into this reservation over here. Is that cool? And we're like, you bet, champ. You bet. That may not be the most historically accurate take. In fact, it might be a completely revisionist bullshit take, the kind of thing that we should be embarrassed about. Critical race theory tries to see through some of that. I don't think that's a problem. Another one of those uncomfortable words, cishet. I am a cishet man. That means that I am a heterosexual man, and I am cis, meaning that I essentially identify, it's actually cisgendered. I identify with the gender that I was born into. This is a way of communicating about people who are comfortable in their assigned gender in conversations that would include people who are not. So trans people, for example, or people who are, gender is more fluid for them, or what have you. There's nothing wrong with any of these perspectives. Cishet isn't an insult. Cis actually is a term used throughout science to describe sort of like the normative stance on a population. And yeah, gender is a spectrum. It's a bimodal and not bipolar. Bipolar would mean here is girl, here is boy, that is the world. And you hear people argue all the time, like, it is bipolar, and then you're like, well, what about people who like are intersex, or people who are boy but have some, whether genetic or cultural or whatever, some actual like definable characteristics that are girl. Like, what about that? Well, they go, well, yeah, like, that's real, but it's still two poles, and that's it. Like, no, it's bimodal. Modal meaning there are two averages, right? So if you think back to your math class in junior high, mean, median, and mode. Your mean and average is the one that we're all comfortable with. You take 6 numbers, you divide, add them up and divide the total by 6. That's your average. Median is the exact halfway point between the largest and smallest, if I'm remembering correctly. And then mode is your most common answer. So if you are, I can't think of a good example, but in the case of gender, the two most common answers are male and female. But they're not the only answers, meaning it's two modes, bimodal, with all of the space in between that can be filled in accordingly. That's not a bad thing. And to be cishet means that, with the fact that I have a dangly wiener penis, I am a male. And I identify as a male. And that works for me. Cool. Other people don't have that same experience. That doesn't make them wrong or bad or evil. So cishet just means someone who, like me, is cool with the wiener they got. This is sort of a different topic, but you get a lot of debates about, like, because trans laws are a thing right now and transphobia is a real thing right now, you get a lot of people talking about trans issues, and especially like debate bros will talk about like biological sex or sex as a social construct. And I'm just going to go on the record and say there is such thing as biological sex. We don't understand it properly, because biological sex is not, it's not enough to have an X and a Y or an X and an X. That's not all the things that define physical sexuality as per how we view it. It goes a long way, but those two pieces are not exclusively, like if you were to take an embryo and pull out the X chromosome and put in a Y chromosome instead, that doesn't mean you get a boy. It means you're likely to get a boy, but it's not a clear cut. This is the button to push. So I would assume that as we become infinitely aware of all of the nuances of our DNA and how it refers to development, that we eventually would be able to say these 750 different key components are what make you biologically male, biological female, or somewhere in between. The concept of gender being a social construct makes sense to me, right? Because we don't have, people are always talking, like the conservatives, the biological lie I'm being forced to tell when I have to tell some man that it's a woman. Like, no, you're not being forced to fucking have a biological. If you met someone before the age of that we live in, and they said to you, I am a woman, okay, then they're a woman. You didn't ask them to validate this with an intense and thorough inspection both of their sex organs and of their genetics. You just sort of took it at face value. And that was that. And there were plenty of people who didn't really fit exactly the boy or girl thing, but our society was designed in such a way that people answered that question one way or the other. We're at a place now where we're a little more flexible in our understanding of things. We understand that there are people who do not feel the same way about their gender as the biology says, and that there's nothing wrong with that. So it is a social construct. I understand how someone could see someone who, like, let's just say that I was a trans woman and I was presenting like this, and someone said, "Oh, how's it going, fella?" And I went, "Oh, actually, I am a lady." I can understand how someone would be like, "But I'm not. I'm not a lady. If I was a trans woman, I would probably be, doing some of the things. If I wasn't, that doesn't change the fact that that's how I identify." And if I said to somebody, "Please call me Big Ugly Jim," and they go, that's not your biological name," well, fuck you. You're an asshole. Why is gender any different? If I said I am a lady and someone said, "No, you are not," and I said, "Eat a bag of dicks, you piece of shit. I am in fact a lady. Call me she." Why is that so hard for people to fucking do? There's a huge movement by teachers through the curriculum to implement critical thinking at a very young age. Guess who's all butthurt about it? I'll let you fill in that blank. Ooh, I know the answer. It's the Jesus people and the conservatives. I know that answer because capitalism thrives when people aren't able to think for themselves. That's like a huge benefit to capitalism. I'm not saying people who are capitalists are stupid or anything of the sort, nor am I saying that all people who are capitalists are incapable of critical thought. That would be incorrect. But I will say, quite contentedly, that people who are taught to critically think and understand how to do so often turn the societies that they are raised in, turn them on their ear and say, "I don't think I believe these things. I believed them until I learned how to question them. Now that I can question them, I see flaws in what I'm being presented with that I can't go with anymore. I can't support, I can't believe in." That's a thing. There's a reason why your sweet little teenage farm girl goes off to university, some leftist university, and comes back a angry lesbian, blah, cultural studies, blah. Yeah, because she learned they learned how to question things and how to formulate their own answers and how to question the assumptions that they'd already made, right? Critical thinking is huge, and critical race theory is just critical theory with race applied. Critical theory is important to learn, and it makes us better people. It makes us better thinkers. The point that I was going to bring up with the whole arguing around biology versus social construct, why can't we just be good? Rather than having to have some reason when someone says, "Hey, I identify as a person of this gender or of no gender or of, indiscernible gender," why can't we just be like, "All right, I may not understand it, but cool." What benefit do we get from trying to show them that they're a lying poop face? We're just supposed to be accepting, like, especially those people who are Christians and who are like all about the Jesus. Isn't their book kind of about not being an asshole? So don't, be an asshole. I don't know. I find them to be the most intolerant. 100%. Obviously, that's a generalization, and there are some incredibly tolerant, wonderful Christian people out there. But I do believe that the world over, they are the exception and not the rule.